Hi everyone, welcome to our final event of LGBT History Month. It's coming to an end next week, so we thought we'd do something slightly different. So we've invited some folk over from Out Together and other groups, which they'll tell you a little bit more that they're part of in Leeds and West Yorkshire, to talk about their experiences. We are going on, it's been sent out on Teams as well, so if we get any questions from there, we'll ask you as well, and any questions from the room, feel free to ask away. It's going to be a really informal chat, and we're hoping it'll last for about 35 minutes, 35 to 40 minutes roughly. Super. So everyone, most of you know who I am. I'm Ali. I work for Touchstone. And I'll let you introduce yourself. Over to Malak first.
Ladies first.
Ladies first.
Heck. Thank you. My name is Pauline, and I'm delighted to be invited to be here. Though I feel slightly under false pretenses because I wasn't out in the 1980s. So if you're talking about that particular part of history, I can't really say anything personal about that. Although I would want to say that in some ways what gay people were going through in the 1980s is happening now for trans people. Maybe not quite on that scale, but pretty bad. And I should say that I've just come from the event on Saturday, the vigil for Brianna in Park Square, and that just kind of brings into focus the reality of life at the moment for trans people. That's me. I mean, I'm retired. I spent most of my career working for the Department of Health, a big government building on Quarry House. But we're glad to be released from that and enjoying my life now in retirement. Now I'm I'm a trustee for the Leeds LGBT Community Consortium, in which I work with Matt and others on that.
Fantastic.
Hello, everybody, and thanks for this opportunity to come and talk about Out Together, of which I'm the chair. It was a social group that has become a charity, and our focus is to provide activities and support to the older members of our LGBT community across West Yorkshire, but doing it from a solid base which is intergenerational. And the reason why we want to stress the intergenerational, and I speak here as an old person, is because one day we all get older, and one day we could be in need of support. And I was around in the 60s, 70s and 80s, so I'm here to talk about what that was like for me. But I think what Pauline and I share is very much, we are quite lucky in the way that we've been able to survive. And there are a lot of people, for all sorts of reasons, who don't enjoy that quality of life that we've been able to achieve. So I'm here to answer any questions, talk about any of the issues. As a gay man, that's all I can do.
Yeah. So over to Pauline. You said you wasn't out in the 80s. When did you transition? Tell us a bit about your story in your own words.
Well, I was born in the 1950s. I am that old, and some of my earliest memories are of my longing to have been to be a girl, and it was all quite innocent and pure, and I was happy about that. My older brother and I would have talk about it at night. I'd say at Christmas I want a dress, I want a doll, stuff like that, and then I learned to be ashamed of it, and shame and guilt became a huge part of my life. So I identified later on as a cross-dresser, transvestite, as they used to call us, and that was a particularly shameful thing to be. And I lived in terror of being discovered that this was who I am. So I would first of all start wearing my mother's clothes, and then a bit later buy my own. And I can't tell you how many times I purged. I bought clothes, wore them, threw them away out of shame and disgust at myself. And it didn't help, in one sense, that I was a pretty religious person. I had lost my faith, then regained it. It was quite a strong, important part of my life as a Christian. And that eventually led me to be a Catholic convert back in 1983. So, and then I got married. So I was kind of totally without any escape. I was committed to a life of utter repression and self-denial and an attempt to perform a role which was incredibly hard for me. I did it as well as I could, but the church in a way helped with that. It gave me a kind of structure, a framework, even though it told me that I was sinful and wrong. It kind of, the discipline of the church helped me to kind of live with that, so I could survive in the marriage and attempt to be a parent to my children. But eventually, of course, it collapsed. My mental health was constantly under strain and pressure. I was surviving only on antidepressants. And eventually I had to come out to my ex-wife. She was disgusted and rejected me completely. Eventually it led to divorce. After the divorce, my older daughter also.
We can
Anyway,
move
I
on.
lost-
We can move on.
I lost both my daughters. So it's the price sometimes that we pay, not just trans people, but especially trans people. When you come out and be yourself, it can come at a huge price. And sometimes at the most extreme, you pay with it with your life, like poor Brianna did, who obviously had been bullied, was a victim of hatred, which was actually stoked and inflamed by the government, by the media, by the churches. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily lead directly to murder, but it creates the conditions in which hatred is allowed and these actions become more possible, in which you're encouraged to think of trans people as not fully human, as lesser. That's the situation we're in. I don't regret for a moment. I mean, all I regret is it took me so long to do this. I only properly transitioned formally, having lived a double compartmentalized life for a long time, about 10 years ago. And it's done wonders for me, but it's also involved huge losses in my life and brought other great challenges with it, I have to say. But it's something you have to do. You know, surely that's what we're all called upon to do in our lives, to fulfill our own nature as fully as we can, no matter what price it comes at. But that price can be very high.
And you touched on people taking their own lives and stuff, and we hear about it. Being part of the community, we hear about it every year. There's not a year that goes by when someone within Leeds or Bradford that we know on the LGBT community hasn't taken their own lives. There's one at the start of this year. There's one every single year. But when it's been recorded in figures and anything like that, there's nothing to highlight that they are part of the LGBTQ plus community. They just, sexuality doesn't come into it. It's just a male or female person that's taken their lives. And yeah, it's important that as a community we work to try to encourage people to open up and talk about it. And I suppose that's why groups like Out Together and all the other groups, there's at least 4 or 5 groups that I know for older folk within the area. So there's Out Together, there's the Stage Group, Older and Bolder, Silver Pride. It's really important to have them, but not just for older folk as well, for younger people as well, because that's really important to have somewhere you can go and talk without it involving alcohol or without it involving a scene venue as well. So that's still lots of work to be done there. Just going back to your story, so what was the 10 years ago, what was the defining point that made you decide that you were going to come out and live your true self?
Well, I very much wanted not to grow old alone. I thought it would be an awful fate, and I was wrong about that, because I am doing that now, more or less. And that was one of the things that held me back. I thought, if I transition, who'll want to be with me? Nobody wanted to be with her. And I was wrong about that as well, actually. But that was the idea I had. So I still kept on clinging to the idea that I would be happier living in my assigned sex, being with a partner. And it was only when a relationship with somebody went disastrously wrong, largely because of my bad behavior, my irritability, my grumpiness, my impatience, which is all reflecting my basic discomfort with the whole situation. So I almost got myself into another terrible mess. And what saved me was when she had enough. We were in the middle of North Wales on holiday, and she said, right, I'm leaving in the middle of the night. So you can't, you know, you've got to at least wait till the morning. So she did, and I drove her to the station, never saw her again, went straight back. And from that moment, I kind of gave up trying to fight this. I gave up the futile attempt to resist being who I am, my nature, and just went for it. And that was quite an adventure. It involved not just asserting my true gender identity, but exploring the sexuality that might come with that, which can be quite a puzzle for trans people as well. I came out at work, and I was fortunate to be working in a government department, which is largely a fairly favourable environment in which they do try their best to make it happen for you, tick all the right boxes. In fact, they're very pleased to have me there, the first person in the Department of Health ever to transition, because just having me there meant they moved up some places in the Stonewall employers poverty ranking. So that was one of the things they probably regretted when I left. They wouldn't regret the lack of the work that I did very much, I don't think. They might have missed my cakes, less so when I became vegan, because that's been another passion for me in my life. And I would say that once I transitioned, lots of other things changed. Once I became myself, lots of barriers kind of came down, collapsed, and there were lots of spiritual changes. I left the Catholic Church eventually, and became a vegan, changed my politics completely to be much more liberal and progressive, and just became, I think, I hope, a nicer person. A better person.
I've been to a few talks you've done in the past, and the poetry stuff that you did at.
Yes, I started writing poems.
It was absolutely fantastic. That whole evening was amazing, and I'm sure we can hopefully ask you back, the whole team, to do some of that poetry stuff. It was really, really good.
The thing is, Ali, I love myself now in a way I never allowed myself to do before. You know, I did. I mean, you can't not completely not love yourself, and I'm still the same person. But I just hated this part of me, which is actually who I am, the most precious, sacred, important part of me. And having suffered all my life from gender dysphoria, suddenly I was experiencing gender euphoria. And I can't tell you what joy that has given me, which still persists and helps me to keep going, even during the hard and difficult times that I still have in my life, you know, as we all do. But it's just the last 10 years has made up for all the rest, really.
And Tim, tell us about your story in your own words.
Oh, well, gosh, mine is so relatively simple, and I am incredibly lucky. I was born in the 40s, so I'm probably the oldest person in the room. And I was born into a wonderful family. I had a wonderful dad who I credit for being totally liberal. He was sort of in the theatre a little bit. He had gay friends, so when I eventually came out, there was absolutely no problem. In fact, he encouraged me. They used to let me bring gentlemen callers back home, and so because I was so comfortable, I was still there when I was 25. I came out probably to them when I was about 22. I had 3 amazing years. I lived on Merseyside and worked and enjoyed a great social life. And then I met my husband, and we're still together. He was here in Yorkshire, And I decided it was time. I wanted to always be in a domestic situation with another person, with a garden and with dogs, and really to retire to the country. And that's what I did. And I'm still there. We're still in the same village, and we'll have been together 50 years next year.
Wow.
However, in all that time, I recognized what was happening in the world beyond mine. And it's because of that and the impact that that's had on the people who are of my and Pauline's generation and how they were the unlucky ones that I wanted to get involved with Out Together, because their stories aren't as lucky as mine has been. And I can only speak for being a gay man, because those people faced all sorts of fear, like Pauline was describing, back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. If you were gay, you could be imprisoned for loving somebody. You could be imprisoned for, doing something that was against the law. And there were police provocateurs tempting you into creating a crime that they could then arrest you. Then you were faced with the shame. Then you were faced with the chance that you might lose your job or lose your family, lose your friends. So that meant that people were scared. And still to this day, some of those people are still unable to be out openly at a time when they have to be themselves. Because when you get older, you lose your confidence. If you haven't got the family networks or the support from a kind of a social group that will give you that extra help, it's hard to cope on your own if your mental health is an issue, and having to deal with agencies who might be necessary for you to carry on living independently at home. So there becomes an issue about going back into the closet so that people can't then abuse you. And my niece works in a care home for dementia people, and she was telling me the story about a gentleman there who'd come out or had been found out by another chap who was an ex-army, who physically and verbally abused him for being gay. And that's in the care home environment that's supposed to be looking after people's interests. There are many, 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 many stories like that all around the place. So what we're trying to do is to give people the kind of support that means they are talking to others who've been through their journey. The one thing that unites us all, we've talked about this earlier, is we've all had to come out probably with fear. We're worried about the impact it might have on the things that matter most to us. So to this day, we never forget those experiences, and it colors the way you look at the world. When I want to stay as independent as possible. If Malcolm died, I would probably want to leave the house where we are now and move somewhere else. But what would it be like as a person on my own with no partner? I've never lived on my own. I'm scared of what it would be like for me and how I would cope in that environment. So there are lots of fears that we still share as we grow older, and together, being out together, the generations looking after each other like you do within a family. And one of our members said, "You are like family to me, because I know I can talk to people who will understand me and who will be sympathetic and help me." And that's why it's so important that we as a community not only support each other, but the message I always try and leave, particularly for the younger generation, is do not take the rights that my generation fought for. And I was out on the streets, I was in campaign for homosexuality, I risked my job by being very, very open. So those rights that were won then and have gone all the way through to winning, equal marriage and lots of other things, and it's still a long way to go. Do not assume that the tide cannot turn. And as Pauline is saying, that is happening with the trans community. It's become a political football in Scotland. And certainly in countries throughout the world, the tide is turning in the States and so on. Do not be complacent. Be prepared to fight for those rights that you have all inherited. Okay, so that's my story.
Thank you.
So can I just
yeah.
say something partly in response to that, Ali? talking about families and our fear of being on our own, of being rejected. And many of us do experience rejection from our birth families. That's happened to me, and it's unbelievably painful. However, many of us in our community, this may be true of people here as well, find our families of choice, and that can make all the difference. I can't tell you what difference it's made to my life. I'm not on my own. I was afraid of being on my own, but actually I have a chosen queer family, and I couldn't be prouder and happier to have them. So I've got a trans masculine son. I've got a trans woman sister, 2 trans women sisters. I've got a gay twin and a non-binary child of choice who lives in Germany. And maybe I'll acquire further members of my family of choice. And that has made such a difference. And that is possible. And it doesn't take away the pain of losing your birth family, but it is a big compensation for it. And it's one of the great things in our community, I think, that can happen. And fortunately for me, has happened. And I don't know if I could have coped without that.
Yeah, I think it's true for most LGBTQ folk that they have two families. They have the biological family, whether they speak to them or not, but then they'll have the family of choice, and that's the people that they will rely on the most.
Yeah.
And it's good to see, but I suppose groups like Out Together and all the other groups really help build them family bonds and create them new families. And it's important to have groups like that.
And we've learned from the younger generation that it isn't always plain sailing. We had an event the other night, and there was a lovely young gay. I always. Can I still say they were gay girls? Is that possible? So a lovely couple of gay girls, and they were chatting away, and and then I asked a few questions and said, how was it, and so on, about coming out. And one of them said, actually, I lost my family. Even now, that happens. They're rejected. Can you imagine the impact that has on anybody, that you're rejected for being the person that you are? And that's the worry. That's the constant battle that we have to fight, is to change people's attitude. But our main purpose is to provide that safe haven. And by example, and by telling people stories, we can bit by bit change their attitudes. I was going to come back because you did say about the time period that I went through, and I did live through the AIDS crisis. I lived through so many challenges, and I because I was in a permanent relationship, obviously we were safer, but we lost friends to AIDS. We lost all kinds of connections because of what was happening. My husband was a teacher, had lots and lots of friends in schools at the time when Section 28 was introduced, which made it really, really difficult for people to be open about themselves and to be able to teach the way that they wanted to teach. So lots of things going on, but I was an observer really from the outside. And not directly affected, but what a time to live through it. That constant pressure gets to you sometimes.
Yeah, I remember as a young person seeing the adverts on TV with regards to AIDS and stuff and the tombstones, and it was just terrifying, it kind of like it was almost designed to stop you from being gay. It was like it is a gay disease and all that kind of stuff. It must have been horrible for the community as a whole to kind of be discriminated against for being LGBT, but then also with the AIDS and HIV pandemic, it must have been so much more to cope with.
You had that constant gay plague thing thrown at you. It was a plague. It was something that only affected gay people, a bit like monkeypox in recent times. Everybody suddenly says, "Oh, it's the gay people who are doing this." But we know we're an easy scapegoat. If anybody wants to blame anything that's going wrong, you can see that with the politicians. they will try and find a group that they can isolate and say, oh well, that's they've done it with on the basis of race in so many countries in the world, and it's always an escape for them. They can take the spotlight away from their failings and put it on somebody else who they can blame.
Well, you will have noticed that in that ghastly competition to be the next prime minister, the candidates lined up, competed with each other to see who could be the most transphobic. I mean, all the problems going on in the world and the country at the moment, that was one of the key questions they were all asked, and they just tried to prove that they were going to be the most transphobic. Rishi Sunak, when he was campaigning, said he would reform the Equality Act. Never mind the Gender Recognition Act, which is not really so important. The Equality Act, which protects us, he said he was going to remove the protection that gives from trans people. It's terrifying, you know, that it's become such a high profile issue, and that it's politicians attach so much importance to proving that they are transphobic. I mean, how disgusting is that? And they have blood on their hands. Ultimately, it leads to the kind of tragedy we saw with Brianna.
Yeah, and also conversion therapy as well. You know, how long has that been on the agenda? You know, every single prime minister of the last 5 or 6 we've had, yes, we're going to look at conversion therapy. We're going to ban conversion therapy. Oh, we'll ban it for LGBT folk, but not for T folk. Yeah. It's like, you know, why is that? There's all, and then if you look at the situation in Scotland now, one of the candidates standing, Christian, has lost, just lost loads of votes because of her biased, non-biased views on LGBT folks, and how she would have voted against same-sex marriage if she was there, and you know, all that kind of stuff. It's like, you want to lead a country, where that is diverse and wants to be welcoming to everyone, but then you've got these views yourselves. And without getting political, you know, we've had that kind of government now for too long.
Well, all they're trying to do in Scotland was make life a little better for a tiny group of people who are presently very demonized and persecuted and disadvantaged. It wasn't going to make a huge difference to anybody, quite honestly. It would have sent an important symbolic message: we're on your side. And our government, the UK government, chose to make it an absolutely momentous issue affecting the whole constitution. You know, they've invoked this power to overrule Scottish legislation for the first time over this. You know, it's beyond belief. Yeah. And of course, it's going to greatly help the cause of Scottish independence, you'd have thought, which again, you'd have think the government, UK government, was not in favour of. Yeah. It's bizarre. But it's very sad that Nicola Sturgeon, obviously this has been a difficult issue for her. She stood up bravely to defend trans people at some political cost to herself. And I'm really sorry to see her go.
Yeah. So moving on, one last question before I open it up to the floor. Tell us about your fondest or happiest memory of being LGBT, or one of the, you know, it could be anything.
That's easy.
Go on then.
Not just first coming out, because that was actually quite challenging. I wasn't even in a good place mentally at the time. No, it's one of the things you're not supposed to talk about, actually. But it was when I had my gender surgery, and that week in hospital, I'll never be as happy again as I was then.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Whenever anything bad happens to me now, I'll always have that in my life, that intense euphoria that I experienced then. I became much more fully myself then. Now, I have to, however, emphasize, it's not the case for all trans people. It's not your surgery that determines your gender, but for some of us, it's a very important part of our journey, and it was for me.
Just on that, before we come to Tim, did you go through the NHS doctor's process, or because for those that don't know, it's roughly about a 5-year waiting list to get your first appointment at the moment.
Wow.
At least 5 years, at least.
I waited 3 years for my first appointment at the Leeds Gender Clinic. And I was impatient by that time. So this is a way in which, like Tim was saying, we are rather more privileged than the average trans person. You know, I'd had a reasonably good job. I had some financial security, I had resources, I had information, so I could go down the route of private treatment, which is denied to so many people.
Yeah.
So I was very fortunate in that way.
Wow, gosh, after such a long life, I'm going to tell you, but perhaps one of the most memorable things, and one of the things I'm proudest of. And I mentioned I grew up on Merseyside, and I was part of then what was known as the Campaign for Homosexual Equality. And this was at a time when gay liberation was just starting, but we were the kind of quiet ones, while gay lib was like, you know, banging the drum. But I had the courage on behalf of the CHE group and Merseyside to go to the offices of the main newspaper group in Liverpool, the Liverpool Daily Post and Echo, and I was tasked to place an advert. And this is in the days before the internet or anything else like that. You went in and you handed in what you wanted to go in the pages of the paper, and you stand with loads of other people at booths with talking to somebody, you know, who's going to do it for you. So she said what it was, the activity, we were having a dance on the Royal Iris, which is an iconic ferry boat that goes up and down the Mersey. And we booked it to have a party on a Saturday night for CHE on Merseyside. And I went in with this advert to place. I was about 23. And you had to say what it was. So I said, oh, well, it's welcoming everybody to the, and I hesitated, the Campaign for Homosexual Equality's dance on the Royal Iris. And there was silence. And people looked, and you know, it's almost like the room went quiet. So anyway, we got through that. We had the dance on the boat, but they didn't tell the crew that it was going to be for the gay community. And once the music started and people started to dance together, apparently the crew went on strike. They were going to take us right back to port again. But anyway, consultation took place, and we had the most fantastic evening.
The crew gay anyway.
Oh, if only, yeah, that would have been fun. So of all the things that I remember, I think I wasn't particularly a courageous person, but I'm proud of that. And I'm proud in later life of sticking up for things which I believe in. And I won't let people say they should do something. It's always them. They should do something. And I said, no, I'm going to do something. What about you? So that's my message is, if we want to do anything, it's us, we do it.
Super. I'm going to open up to the floor. Any questions? I've also asked online. We've got a couple of people online if they've got any questions. If you've got any questions, just stick your hand up. You can either type it in the chat box, or if you want to read your questions, or if you want to ask the questions directly, we're connected up to the speakers here, so everyone will be able to hear you. Hi.
Like really interesting to know that history and the Merseyside. And did you have any crossover with like other sort of campaigning groups at the time, or anything? Or you kind of very separate?
The answer is the answer is no. Because this is in the early 70s. So what had happened, just my engagement was, before I was 21, I knew I needed to find organizations who were campaigning, and it was very quiet, very subtle. And I was sent down to work in London for a while, and I contacted something called the Albany Trust. And that was one of the leading organizations to bring about law reform. But they were really, really nervous about dealing with me, even though the act had changed. They wouldn't help me meet other people because I was under 21. So I really struggled. I remember going to one event there, and they were very nervous about letting me in. It was just off the King's Road. So from then I found CHE in on Merseyside, and I was active until I moved and I came up to Yorkshire, and I then ceased getting involved in, if you like, from the gay community's point of view, I got involved in local community stuff and politics and all that kind of thing. But what was happening then, the tide was turning in our favour, because I have to admit now, I think gay liberation was right. I think you have to fight. You can't just be quiet and expect it to happen, you know, gently and all the rest of it. We should not be scared of standing up and shouting for our rights. So I was wrong then, but I was young. But I hope that the people who have got the courage to be out and about and active will be able to do well. It is happening. We know in the trans community, people are fighting hard, and that is the only experience I have. As I said, I've led a sheltered, positive life, and I'm lucky.
That's it. For the new generation, but question, you mentioned that you converted to Catholic in 1983.
Yeah.
Then you obviously did that. I'm just wondering, did you still reconcile some form of faith to your identity?
Thank you for that. Those have been the two main kind of conundrums in my life. Being a person of faith, being on that sort of spiritual journey, and being a trans person, and the struggle to reconcile those two things, which seem mostly to be working against each other. So I desperately wanted to follow a path of sanctification, of holiness. And I also wanted to pursue a path of feminization. And it felt like I couldn't do both. And indeed, the extent to which I gave way to my feminine nature, it felt like it was making me unholy and sinful. So it was a really, really difficult thing to deal with and manage. And mostly, you know, when I was in the Catholic Church, it was all about repression and self-denial, feeling even that when I was denying myself in this way, I was pleasing God. That God wants us to be miserable and unhappy. This is the cross that we have to bear. And that's what the church was telling me, and still does tell LGBTQ Catholics. But it was quite a hard thing to break away from, I have to say. And a good turning point for me as a trans Christian was joining a group called the Sibyls, which is a network of trans Christians. And through them, I met people, including people, ordained people who transitioned, and they were really helpful in showing me how it was possible, not just to think that it's not sinful to be trans, but actually it's what God wants for you. This is the path to holiness and pleasing God. So it gives me a terrible sense of having barked up the wrong tree for so much of my life. And I did, for a long time, feel a big sense of grievance against God. Why did you let me do this? You know, I think I've just about forgiven God for that now. Whether God's forgiven me or not, we shall see.
Any other questions?
I just wanted to ask, because you've spoken about your relationships with younger queer people and with activism today, I kind of wanted to hear your perspectives on those relationships and what you feel like you can bring to each other. And
With younger people,
yeah,
yeah, I'm delighted to have younger people in my life, people who I've learned far more from. I mean, to some degree, as you get older, you fall into a kind of mentorship role for people. You try to support and encourage younger people, but actually, in reality, often it's the other way around. You're learning far more from them than they can ever learn from me. I am the last person anybody should come to for advice on relationships. Except to show people how not to do it. So yeah, I get huge encouragement from having associating with young people, especially my own queer family, and they have a very different perspective. Because I'd say people of my generation, we've come out perhaps later in life, and we're a little bit apologetic about it. You know, thank you for letting me do this. Thank you for doing me the favour of calling me by my correct pronouns. I really appreciate that. Younger people have a very different attitude, and rightly so. They're not prepared to apologise. They're a lot more assertive. And you get into that difficult area of whether that can be taken to too great an extreme, you know,
Yeah.
the limits of activism, when it can become counterproductive.
I recognise that, but I think on the very, very positive side, from the experience that I've had when I've been involved with Out Together, is meeting younger people, because I have some younger family, but generally I don't have much contact. But what's amazed me and really impressed me is some of the work that we've done, and Matt, who's off camera there, has helped broker relationships with organisations whose CSR values are amazing. They encourage their younger people to volunteer, to get involved, and in many ways, that for those companies, it's the only way they can keep and retain people, because people can choose now the type of organisation they want to work for. So that has filtered through to corporate level, which has made our job really, really interesting, because they want to support us. The values that they share, these people, when they're volunteering, have amazed me. If I think back to the days when I was a clerk in Liverpool, in very almost Victorian offices with Victorian style professional firms.
God, that's old too.
I am, but they were the attitude. My partners, I was an article clerk for a firm of chartered accountants. My partners walked to work with a rolled up umbrella and bowler hats, and we were known by our surnames, and it was kind of, I was indented basically as like an apprentice. So it was very, very, very traditional. So the idea, if I'd been discovered as being gay in that environment, I worry about what might have happened. Now we've been dealing with some amazing professional firms who are absolutely in tune with what we're trying to do. They recognize they can do something to give back to the community. And the younger people that they're encouraging have really filled me with such pride in the younger generations, and I'm very confident that they will carry things forward and do the fighting that's going to be needed. So it's been very refreshing. I don't know how much I can teach them. And I think I echo what Pauline said. I learned so much from their ability to just take everything on board, and yeah, we'll deal with it, we'll sort it. So there we go.
I'll take one final question, because we do need to vacate the room very shortly. We've only got it till 1:30. Is that right, Tim? Yeah, so we'll take one final question.
Lot to offer, because what I'm hearing supporting children or young people who are coming out and having to come out at home is that it's trendy and it's cool and it's happening now, and that this is this new craze that's happening, particularly when people are trans. So I think it is important to have that presence of the generations, because otherwise it will just, you know, a narrative will just consume that it is this like trendy, cool thing to do now. If you're not queer, you're not, you know,
Really?
X, Y, Z. But I was just interested too in the use of the word queer, because we've had a lot of debates in other organisations around the use of that word, because obviously it was previously an insult and a horrible slur. And obviously, you know, now, you know, I'm a person who identifies as queer, but even as I tell people that I'm queer, I can see it in different generations, like a raised eyebrow or an uncomfortable
Yeah.
answer to that. So I'm just interested in your take on.
Had long discussions about this. I'm looking to my colleague Matt over there, and we've had to compromise. You're absolutely right. For my generation, it was an insult, but not. It was more than that. You were in danger of being queer bashed because queers were vermin. And it resonates to this day with my generation, and my husband is adamant that he does not want to be associated with the Q word. But we also have to recognize that the people we want to engage with feel very comfortable. Pauline used it in what she was saying earlier. She's proud to be part of the queer community. And I have to accept that this is part of the audience that we need to reach out to. In return, there is a sensitivity, and most of our members are older gay men, and we are trying to change that. And for them, it can be an issue. It might even, if we said we were an LGBTQ charity, there's a danger that we might actually put some people off because they don't want to be associated with that. It's a very, very difficult area, but I really appreciate you answering that question because it's a dilemma. It always will be. But you know, it's getting to lengths in the States now where the acronym is just growing and growing and growing. And so that's why I love the plus. So my personal preference is that we're known as an LGBT plus organization.
LGBTQ plus.
Well, sometimes it's LGBT plus. I mean, the city council is just LGBT plus most of the time. Other organisations are LGBTQ plus.
The thing is, all labels that are given to us, or we apply to ourselves, are simplistic and reductive and approximations. We're all much more complex than any label can ever hope to describe. But for me, queer is the most sort of open-ended. It's the least kind of restricting. There's all sorts of possibilities included within queer, which is why I'm happy with the label for myself, if you have to have a label at all.
Yeah.
Super. We have actually unfortunately run out of time. It's been a lovely, lovely hearing from you both. Just like to thank you on behalf of myself and the organisation Touchstone for taking time out and coming to speak to us. And like I said earlier, hopefully we'll be engaging a lot more with Out Together and doing some work together, and inviting you along to some of our socials for that game of rounders I promised you.
It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank
for
you
the
so much for
opportunity.
taking time.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much.